The green shoots. This week we have an ASEAN focus and we're looking to understand how the ongoing situation is affecting FinTech founders and the broader ecosystem across the region. Lockdown measures tend to make us feel confined, both in our homes but also in our domestic markets. So we hope this discussion will lead to greater knowledge sharing and learnings across the region. The more work we do together and the more experiences that we share, we hope the more resilient we'll become in the FinTech sector. We are just coming up to about 100 people dialing in on the call, so I think we can get going, and I'll hand straight over to my co-host Pat to introduce us to the speakers.
Thanks, Becca. And yeah, we're proud to make this our fifth Green Shoot series. And, you know, we're going to bring you the word on the streets from Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, and of course, Singapore. We have 5 speakers who have the inside track on what's really going on. So if you give a wave as I introduce you, that would be great. So let's start with Niki representing Indonesia FinTech Association. And then secondly, we have Ridzuan representing the Malaysia FinTech Association. Then we have Top representing the Thai FinTech Association. And then lastly, we have a special guest, Maria, who will be providing a voice from the Philippines. So,
and Hock.
Oh, and Hock. Sorry, how could I forget you, Hock? With your Avengers in the background, which is pretty neat. So there's a lot of ground to cover. Clearly I missed one ground. So let's get this show on the road. And I'd like to start with you, Hock, to make up for missing you out. So can we, maybe you could share some advice on well, actually, what advice are you giving to the FinTech startup members in your community at the moment?
I think, I mean, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I think we all have to chin up. And there's a lot of help in the ecosystem for you. I think I can share a piece of good news, at least from Singapore. Today, we just achieved our 500th corporate member. So it's a 45% growth this month. So I think this is the period whereby association can show a lot of value. And then we are all behind you. So I think with COVID-19, a lot has changed. So is the consumer behavior. All will be going digital. So I think medium to longer term, I'm very positive on this FinTech sector. Thanks.
That's good to hear, an upbeat message. And so it'd be good to kind of understand, how does that contrast to what you're seeing in Malaysia, Ridzuan?
Thank you, Pat. In Malaysia, things are looking good as well, as far as digital effort is concerned. I think there's a lot of push by the government in realizing that there is going to be a lot of benefit in terms of going digital. And I think there is also a realization that the new norm after COVID-19 is going to be a lot to do with a low-touch economy. There's no more typical or the previous way of doing stuff. So with low-touch economy, there will be a lot of need for the last mile delivery to be digital, and a lot of communication to be on a digital platform as well. So this is good for FinTech and innovative companies and innovative effort as well. So I think it's good for the community here in Malaysia, and we're looking forward to share that with you as well going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Ridzuan. And I know the concept of a low-touch economy is something we'll come back to, and you articulated that well in a call we had before, so I'd like to dive into that. I know you've been doing a lot of advising to the government in Malaysia. Niki, you were also very heavily working on policy and working with the government and regulators in Indonesia. Can you share some of the challenges that FinTechs are facing at the moment, and how you're trying to address them in Indonesia?
Yes, I think, with FinTechs, it's a mixed bag. With every crisis, there's a mix of downturns and opportunities, and certainly for those serving in relying on distributing credit, there's definitely challenges in that sector due to whether or not the underlying productive business is still performing and the challenges that presents. On the other hand, you have digital payments going through a massive boom, and I think these are natural sort of differences in it does depend on the specific vertical. I think what we're trying to do is focus on what can be done now and what can be mobilized. There are more than 300 million e-money subscribers and users in Indonesia, and these represent a significant and formidable digital distribution channel for government aid, and specifically around a lot of welfare programs designed to create a social safety net. So we're very intensively mobilizing quite a lot of virtual working groups. In fact, I think we're getting more audiences with more government agencies and ministries a lot more faster than we ever have. So there's this new wave of opportunity, and I think a lot more openness towards a fully digital process. And I think this is, and not only from the government side, but obviously from consumer adoption. So I think you have both sides helping foster a new environment. And yes, it has its challenges, but the community is mobilizing pretty quickly to see what all the players can do, how we can leverage each other's strengths. And it's not just FinTech, but e-commerce and online learning platforms, etc. It's the greater, I would say, digital community trying to figure out how to collaborate and bring real impact in a matter of weeks.
Virtual working groups, online learnings, a bigger move to digital, or an accelerated move to digital. Maria, is that what you're seeing on the ground in the Philippines too? How are fintechs responding and coping at the moment?
So first of all, what we've seen originally was a really early response from the different government agencies coming from the central bank, the ACC. So a lot of the mobilization were led by the government agencies. There was specific relaxation of requirements. For example, the fintechs around lending and credit were specifically given guidances on what they were allowed, not allowed to do, just to ensure that there was consumer protection. But what we've seen, despite the initial a little bit, consideration of what's really going to happen, what we saw was mobilization from different fintechs and established financial institutions for collaboration. Before there was a little bit more reservation to engage the fintech, but now we've seen that sometimes the services they cannot necessarily untap, and we can mobilize faster to bring a product to market. So there's been a lot of different collaborations that the established institutions and fintechs are supporting the ecosystem and also the consumers across the Philippines, not just for bringing funds to the unbanked. Also, what we've seen is that generally anything that has to do with e-commerce, financial payments, electronic payments, transportation, e-learning is also another thing, and even entertainment and e-streaming and communication. That's something that we've seen that has gone off the roof in the last couple of months.
That's great to hear, and I think we'll definitely be touching upon some of the growth areas within fintech. But as we all know, SMEs make up a big part of the economy, and this is very relevant in Thailand in particular, where it contributes massively to employment. And so Top, it'd be good to just get an overview of what you're seeing in the fintech space in Thailand, and if you could pick out some key data points, that would be great to hear.
Sure. So right now, I think everywhere around the world, we are seeing the highest unemployment rate in the history of the world. I think we went from 3% to 10% unemployment in a few weeks. The highest unemployment rate in the last 100 years was back in the Great Depression in 1929. We went from 3% to 6%. That took them like a year back in the last generation. But what I'm trying to tell you here is that this crisis is different from the previous crisis, or even back in 2008. During the Great Depression, the crisis may be from the shift in consumption behavior from going from the wartime production to consumer production. But in 2008, that's when banks took excessive risk. And Lehman Brothers went down, and then a bunch of people lost their job, and they could not go back to the same company. But this crisis is different because there are a lot of companies didn't do anything wrong. They might be very profitable, but because of this corona virus, the government announced this shutdown. So a lot of profitable company could not do their businesses, and a lot of people maybe you know, a few millions are losing their jobs. But these are like restaurants and shops and bar owners. So Thai governments are providing loans, soft loans to help, you know, SMEs to extend their runway, to make sure that there's no interruptions in the supply chain. SMEs account for almost 90% of all the employments in Thailand. So the Bank of Thailand is issuing out soft loans to help with SMEs as well as you know, FinTech. Right now, you know, FinTech, they came together in a group and, you know, and talk to the government to provide, to ask for the loans to extend their runway. It's much harder now in Thailand to help different companies here, because in 2008 it was very easy to call up maybe 25 CEOs in one group and hand them checks, right, to bail out banks. But at this time, the government needs to bail out like SMEs and people. It's the technology is not quite there yet. People, even the government is trying to bail out people by giving out 5,000 baht each, but people are complaining because those that really deserve the fund didn't get the money, when those didn't really deserve the fund ended up with the money. So people are complaining, and the only way the government is, you know, helping companies in Thailand is via commercial banks, giving out loans to commercial banks. But commercial banks takes time to deploy those funds because they need to do due diligence on small companies. But we cannot afford to wait for long. You know, the funds need to be deployed in a few weeks because SMEs are going to run out of cash very soon. So they're accepting, in Thailand, the government is accepting this margin of error now in exchange of time to deploy funds quickly to help SMEs and FinTech startups. And this is what the trend we are seeing right now in Thailand. Recently, the Thai FinTech Association is helping to draft a letter to send out to the government, and even the local VCs here, they're providing bridge loans to help FinTech startups to go through this short-term you know, interruption in this supply chain crisis. This is not the economic structural problem like 2008. This is a health problem. So the government is doing their best now to extend the runway until we discover this vaccination and profitable businesses can get back to their feet.
Thanks, Top, for sharing. And yeah, I completely understand. It's certainly a tough situation, and you know, it's good to hear that the public sector is stepping up here, and that kind of segues quite nicely to an area that certainly MAS have been looking at for the last few weeks, as many central banks and associations around the world. And I kind of wanted to just pick up on this, Hock around you know, the need for the public and private sectors to come together. And it'd be good to kind of, you know, get some insights on what you've been working on for the last few weeks, and bringing that to life, because there is value across the whole of the ASEAN region. I think you're on mute, Hock.
Yeah, the situation in Singapore is quite unique because we are a more international hub. More than 80% of our members have at least a B2B offering. More than 80% of them operate beyond Singapore. And unfortunately, 45% of all the FinTech companies in ASEAN are also based in Singapore, which means that with COVID-19, in absolute number, we have more FinTech companies affected. So 4 weeks back, we did a survey with our members. Close to 50% of them said that they are significantly affected by COVID-19 in their operation. And their top 3 challenges: number 1, business costs, especially on manpower, because manpower typically takes up to 80% of their operating expenses. Number 2 is sales. With the lockdown, you can't do traveling. So a lot of the B2B projects got delayed or reprioritized. And the third challenge, funding also dried up. So with all these 3 challenges, we have been working quite closely with MAS and a few other ecosystem partners. In particular, we exchange information with MAS, and then separately, they are already working on a stream of support packages. So I think on the 8th of April, MAS announced close to 120 million in support for both the smaller financial institutions and the fintechs. So there are quite a number of help given to the fintech ecosystem here. So once you are certified as a fintech company by SFA, you are entitled to, first of all, other than the typical manpower salary support by the Singapore budget, right? You get help in if you have excess staff. Our ecosystem partner like NTUC and E2Y can help your staff to get temporary employment. For example, there are a lot of demand for health screeners or even ambassadors in public transport. Yeah, so that's one. The other thing is that there's a lot of training support tool. It's called the training allowance grant. So you can send your staff for training heavily subsidized at 90%. Meanwhile, you will receive $15 per hour of training. That's the second. I think the more exciting one is what we call the digital acceleration grant. So basically, MAS will co-fund up to 80% of all your digital tools, especially your cloud hosting, because typically a fintech will spend close to $5,000 a month on their cloud hosting. So 80% of that could be co-funded by MAS up to a total of $120,000. And then subsequently, other ecosystem partners also came in, for example, AMTD, to address the part on lack of funding. So, and this funding is not just restricted to Singapore company, it's for the whole of ASEAN, provided you start making yourself prominent in what we call the API exchange. So basically the API exchange is almost the equivalent of LinkedIn for fintechs, whereby they can use that platform to source for new sales with other financial institutions. So if you are present on Epics, right, AMTD is willing to do co-investment with you, with matching investment by other investment partners. And we also work with Razer, because for Razer, they are actually doing quite well now for all the e-gaming. They have across ASEAN close to 80 million customers, mostly millennials. So they also came out with a $50 million fund. So within that, there is a investment portion and also a bridge financing. And they are willing to invest up to 1.5 million per fintech company. And that is also available to all fintechs in ASEAN. So I think the kind of help that are available to the fintechs is quite comprehensive. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Hock. And I think the two parts there you mentioned, the AMTD fund and the Razer fund that apply across ASEAN will be particularly important. Top, you mentioned some of that bridge financing that investors are doing, particularly in Thailand. So hopefully we'll start to see more regional collaboration there. And we can post links to that after the session to these two funds for anyone that's interested to learn more about those. Ridzuan, I wanted to pick up on your point about the low touch economy. If you could talk a bit more about what you think that will look like in the future, and particularly how fintechs can prepare themselves. So there's an audience question here that talks about, as we embrace the new normal, what are the initiatives that the fintech industry is taking, and what will that look like? So yeah, I'd love to hand over to you to explain more about this low touch economy.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. One of the things that we actually highlight in terms of understanding about the new normal going forward, post even now, as we are nearing hopefully the lockdown, the new norm will be low touch economy, as said just now. What we meant by that is we are still going to look for the same services, still going to go for food, still going to go for our haircut and all sort of stuff. Even going into an elevator is going to have a different experience going forward. So this is where we need to think about how digitalization would help in terms of achieving the same result, but doing it and approaching it in a different manner. So what we have really seriously discussed is when school reopen, how is it going to be in terms of managing the social distancing between children, especially those younger children, because they don't really care and they have been locked down for so long. So once they see their friends, I don't think social distancing matters anymore for them. So this is where, as rightly said by Hock and Niki just now, e-learning is going to be one of the ways in terms of how the low-touch economy, low-touch approach, going to become a hybrid approach in terms of even learning in school. So probably for the younger kids, definitely in classes, the distance between tables is going to be farther, and definitely in universities, perhaps classes is going to be arranged and delivered through a digital platform. So, and this is where we need to think about many other matters that needs to be also thought about in the same manner in terms of, say, for example, I shared earlier about haircut. How are you going to do that? Because there's no way you're going to have 1 meter separation between the barber and yourself. So this is where a lot of new innovative thinking that needs to be applied. And we advise and propose to the government to have a policy in terms of how low-touch economy as part of the policy for government to then help certain traditional businesses to actually migrate and go online rather than now providing their services offline. And to do that, we also ask for the GLCs and the government-linked investment companies to step in and be part of that effort for them to shelter the smaller companies, the micro SMEs, in terms of digitalizing their businesses, because I think smaller businesses have less awareness and less knowledge about how digitalization can happen. So GLCs and GLICs, where they have more experience and probably have been involved in digitalization, could help. And this is where the private-public partnership based on low-touch economy policy and sharing of experience between the bigger corporation and the smaller corporation could be actually one of the ways for us to maneuver on how we're going to benefit from the low-touch economy. And last but not least, we also are focusing on how to help bank and non-bank financial institution to actually unify a lot of their processes so that it will become easier for many of the customers to deal with different kind of financial services. One of the areas that we're looking at is probably the KYC process. Because if you go from one institution to another, especially between non-bank and banks, the processes are so different. And this is where I think it needs to be standardized, and effort is being made in starting from having a digital ID for all Malaysian. And that project actually has started much earlier, but with COVID-19, it has been accelerated. So those are the things that I think would become the pertinent element when you talk about low-touch economy, especially in terms of using digitalization. Thank you.
Niki, I can see you nodding along there, particularly around the KYC piece and introducing some kind of standard or interoperability. And I know you've been working on a payment group around interoperability. Do you reflect what Ridzuan's saying? Do you think this is going to be an accelerated period?
100%. I think it's been a pain point in the industry, highlighted as one of the, if not the number one pain point for fintechs, because it's the critical choke point to an onboarding of a new customer, regardless of whatever vertical you're in. So lowering, if your entire platform is digital, but you still require face-to-face onboarding process, it fundamentally undermines that value proposition in terms of reach, speed, and economics of acquiring a customer. But at the same time, it's rightfully understood that there needs to be a high degree of identity attestation and assurance that we can really ensure that you are who you say you are, to also deal with the risk associated with identity fraud and money laundering and terrorism financing. So it's fully understood, but I think we're at a pretty interesting juncture today, where you have the technology that can go to scale. Consumers I mean, everyone's aware of Face ID or unlocking your phone using biometrics. A few countries, especially Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, already have digital ID databases, and Philippines, I hear, is also coming online. At least there's a pan, and Indonesia has already got the vast majority of its citizens' biometrics online as well. So it's about stitching together this framework and creating the right cybersecurity frameworks that allow for high standards of authentication, strong authentication, while at the same time allowing and ensuring that there's a fair playing field and interoperability across a variety of players. Now, there are different engagement models depending on the countries, whether it's a federated digital identity network or it's run by certain government agencies directly. There's definitely different ways that can happen. But I think that this perhaps is an opportunity, because as one of the challenges that Top was pointing out in government welfare payments and GDP payments in general is the identity fraud that can come with it. So targeting and validating end user identities is extremely important. And that also becomes another point about not only KYC, but more importantly, how do we also not only ensure the right distribution, but ensure that the right levels of data privacy are also met from an end user perspective, that personal data protection laws, which all have come online across of ASEAN as well, can be managed. So both sides of the equation. And I think that's where we're putting in a lot of work. We're following standards, international standards, whether it's GDPR, or in the local context, there's been some localization in Indonesia of some of these personal data protection laws. But how do we balance that out, and how do we not make a trade-off between the ease of use and the user experience, which there's a clear benefit, but how do we also make sure that the security comes with it and the data privacy as well? So it's a careful balancing act, and I think today there's a lot of opportunities that allows for enabling greater digital reach, and that it's not only about the KYC, it's about obtaining consent and digital signatures and digital contracts online as well, and being able to do that with high levels of legal assurance in terms of being able to do that cryptographically with a digital signature that allows you to have the properties of non-repudiation. So somebody can't just simply say, oh, I didn't sign that loan, it wasn't me, and try and commit fraud in that way. So how do you keep the whole ecosystem honest and transparent? And there's frankly a lot of standards already out there, whether it's and the World Bank we frequently collaborate with their ID4D team. There's a series of standards globally, and frankly, this doesn't need to be reinvented. And hopefully, off the back of this, we can actually how that can stitch together an ASEAN framework. If all of these processes have the similar interoperability, then perhaps that vision of an ASEAN economic, free movement in the ASEAN region, this will help that go digitally, and whether it's with foreign domestic workers and remittances in that situation, or just entrepreneurs who are moving around and trying to create regional businesses and need more flexibility with being able to be present from any country that they're in.
Sure, and clearly the underlying infrastructure and standards are essential in today's world. They were important before, but it's even more so in today's current environment. But I just want to move on to a topic that has been been discussed quite a bit recently around some of the challenges fintechs are having with sales cycles, and that's something it'd be good to get a view from Maria on in the Philippines. And if we're kind of looking at this low touch economy that Ridzuan's talked about, how can we overcome that the new dynamic of low touch economy and ensure that sales cycles can still continue? It'd be good to get your views on that, Maria.
Yeah, sure. So I think Philippines has been in the current lockdown framework since mid-March. So originally what we saw was a little bit of confusion as to how businesses can transform and become a little bit more flexible and resilient to the existing environment. Initially, it was misunderstood whether this is going to be a long-term or a short-term, but I think that realization came really quickly. So it was really important for people to prepare. We saw interesting business models evolving. So there's a lot of business models that were relying strictly on credit and e-commerce for shopping that at the moment looks unnecessary or superfluous. So what we saw recently was that there's a lot of interesting business models focusing on serving communities that they don't have a reach to go, for example, to buy the basic necessities, or even in the provinces. So a very common example that we see is that your family is in lockdown in Metro Manila, for example, but then the elders who actually do not have the ability to go out and buy basic necessities are in some other part of the Philippines also in lockdown. So communication, video conferencing, internet connectivity, just being able to send money and also being able to support them financially and provide them with the basic necessities have been the very key challenges. We've seen models where there is sort of like an evolution of a voucher or a gift card becoming the new norm for some of those circumstances. We've seen also anything that has to, Filipinos are generally very open to communication, so anything that's to do with streaming, e-gaming has become quite interesting, and we see a big spike in interest also in those services. But generally, the biggest anxiety that we see from people is coming from how to get access to financial support. And there's a lot of different government initiatives that provide for government support, either financial or in kind. But the distribution has become very difficult. I think this specific crisis has brought to light issues when it comes to logistics infrastructure in the Philippines. We see like logistics has been operating for a while. There's been different players in the market, but the moment that they got inundated with the demand at the moment, I think they would really put a lot of pressure and put on the spot. So this is an interesting test for the time to come in terms of how they can scale this up. A lot of the existing incumbents, they're trying to partner with local players, local startups, to support them in data management, specifically how they can understand the different flows and make sure that they can figure out where are the issues in the supply chain. And identify so they can address it. So for example, the average time that you can receive anything from like one of the biggest commerce platforms, it could be anything between 3 to 5 days. In the first couple of days of the lockdown, it was like 10 days, 15 days, and they would call you and then tell you, we actually have run out most of the items in your order. Do you want to proceed? So I think this is an interesting test, and has been a catalyst to bringing a lot of the incumbents to a more digital environment, understanding that this is not going to be the new norm, that they need to develop, and potentially, if they don't have the capacity of doing that in the next couple of months, they need to partner with someone who has that ability to scale it up quickly.
There's a lot of trends there. I think you're all talking about the collaboration between financial institutions and smaller fintechs, and maybe the B2B aspect of business there. I'd like to bring us onto a poll. This is an exciting moment, our 5th week of Green Shoots, and we finally got the poll functionality working. So the audience should now be seeing a poll in front of them. We wanted to get a sense from the audience and also from the speakers about which verticals in fintech seem to be holding up well in the current climate. So which verticals are seeing the most strength at the moment? Niki, you touched on remittances, you touched on foreign workers there. I think that might be, I'm guessing, your answer to this question, but it'd be great to hear your thoughts on which verticals you're seeing as holding up well.
I think the mobile e-money that's been linked to e-commerce and food deliveries that's been skyrocketing. The user penetration was already at a critical mass where it was already becoming a fabric of everyone's normal daily lives. And, given the constraints of social distancing and lockdowns, and even in certain cases where it's not even a lockdown, the shift away from cash has been very clear. I think the paranoia around cash potentially being a means to transmit COVID, or even going to an ATM and touching the ATM keys and not knowing who was in there before you, and whether or not you run risk by even withdrawing cash, not necessarily from the cash, but the ATM machine. So electronic payments has been really taking off. The numbers have been staggering. The growth has been incredible. But again, payments tends to be more of a means to an end, right? So it depends on what exactly is the use case. And those linked around e-commerce and food delivery have clearly been the ones that have been taking off much more so than any other vertical. There are other parts in terms of now, I think there's a lot bigger push for RegTech cybersecurity, RegTech from at least a perspective of things like eKYC and cyber and digital signatures, but cybersecurity as well is, I think the cracks are starting to show, and there's definitely a lot more attacks. So these are areas where people are changing up their strategies and thinking about how to bolster some of these solutions. So I would say that in general, some newer emerging segments like equity crowdfunding have been quite interesting. There have been quite a big community pushes to try and, especially around personal protective equipment, just because it has not always, not everyone, I think, has had access. And this is where the communities have taken their own initiatives to crowdfund and help healthcare workers have access to more personal protective equipment. And there's quite a lot of pretty touching stories that are going around similar to that. So even some of the newer verticals in Indonesia, like equity crowdfunding, which haven't been quite big yet now, because I think there's a real social impact and cause behind it. It's creating a different level of awareness. So I wouldn't quite say it's the same impact in terms of traction yet, but I think the openness of the public and to start looking at these new solutions and figuring out how they can help is definitely changing behaviors. So that's also a very encouraging sign.
Nice. So we need to add equity crowdfunding for this list for the next time we do polls. Top, would you agree with that? It sounds like mobile payments, cyber, RegTech, and then also equity crowdfunding. Top, what would your top one be?
Well, actually, one of the best performing industry in Thailand for FinTech is actually cryptocurrency. It's not on the list, but I would like to actually say that even though we are in the same region, different countries are very different. If you dig deeper, like for Thailand, for example, we are a mobile-driven economy, right? The mobile penetration rate is about 144%, meaning that on average, for every Thai person, we have an average of 1.4 phones. Or the internet access penetration, we are at about 82% internet users, or 57 million out of 70 million people. And we are also a social media users country, 49 million people out of 70 people, 71% social media penetration. But Thailand is not doing so well on the credit card penetration compared to Singapore. Singapore is like the top performers in terms of credit card penetration. But Thailand is doing really well in terms of bank account, penetration. Banks are doing a very good job at providing bank accounts to a lot of people in Thailand. There are not as many unbanked individuals. unlike in the Philippines or in Indonesia, where there are so many unbanked individuals. And I think fintech verticals would be doing really well where the existing players are not doing so well. For example, in Thailand, the industries that are doing well is mobile payments, because we are a mobile-driven economy. We have 1.4 phones, and the internet access is really great for Thailand. The infrastructure is ready, and I think most of the people are now using mobile banking applications. They are winning the market. The banks are winning in terms of cashless payments, but the non-banks players are not winning in the same market as if you look at China or other countries, they are a social banking economy. People are not using mobile banking; they're using WeChat, Alipay for payments, because the environment is different. But in Thailand, everyone already have bank accounts mostly. So there are existing players that are doing really well on certain things. And the best service are mobile payments in Thailand are taking off. But fintech startups are filling in gaps that existing players are not doing so well. Like True Money is the leading e-wallet here in Thailand. They are tapping in the remittance part. They are not able to win over the domestic payments because banks are doing really well on that, but they're doing they are doing better on the other parts, on the remittance side. Or my company is doing really well on the cryptocurrency transactions. The areas that banks are not providing, or the existing players are not providing in the area for Thailand. But I think the general message is that every country is different, even though we're in the same region, and I don't think it's fair to have this standard list of which industry is taking off in this region. It's not one size fits all, I would say.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's different between different countries, different regions. We'll see different results there, but we should be adding cryptocurrency to the list. That's an obvious one. Can we see the results from the poll and see what the audience has put as the highest results there? That should be coming up hopefully on the screens. Okay, so we've got domestic mobile payments as being the highest there by quite a long way. Hock, would you say that reflects what you're seeing in Singapore?
Definitely, and then for remittance, at least in the short run, they are still doing quite well. People are trapped in different countries, so the need to remit money is higher there. But I'm also hearing from the players that the competition is heightening because the traditional players are also coming into this space. They are doing heavy discounting. So I think it might not be too pretty over the next 6 months in this space. But for the time being, remittance is still doing well. And then totally agree with Niki's view. Those ancillary to domestic mobile payments like e-commerce, food delivery, those services like cybersecurity, RegTech, they are doing well now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And clearly you've also got in there the cybersecurity piece. The interesting one for me is around SME lending and P2P lending. And there doesn't seem to be much variation there. And clearly there is a part of SME lending that is in strong demand, and the same with a part of P2P lending, depending on whether that's structured or unstructured or secured or unsecured. And Ridzuan, it'd be good to get your view on this. Is it, are you seeing any differences in Malaysia on the lending side, whether that's SMEs or to consumers, individuals?
Well, in Malaysia, I think for SME lending and P2P lending, the surprising thing is there's still very active market for this space, for this vertical, if you can put it together. Because I saw a lot of campaign now happening by the 20-odd platform available in Malaysia. A lot of companies are now raising money through these platforms, and there are actually quite a few campaigns ongoing as we speak, because I think there's more awareness, like what Niki said just now, in terms of how digitalization connect people, and there are some businesses that has huge social impact, especially if they are actually into, say, for example, healthcare, or in terms of helping the deprived segment of the society, like single mothers or orphanage and whatnot. So those social impact companies are now taking the opportunities of sentiment, created by COVID-19 in terms of now looking for funding, and the crowdfunding platform are actually responding well. And I saw just last week an insurtech company that's making personal insurance, life insurance much easier to understand and much easier to deal with, getting 400% out of the ask amount that they wanted. So this is quite a surprise. And because the ease of doing the transaction via either mobile phone or just through your laptop, making it easier for them to also, for the investor to understand the information. So I think the numbers probably in Malaysia is slightly higher than this, because I saw quite a few campaigns. And just before we started this, I saw another platform is now going for another 5 more companies raising funds, and most of the companies are also social impact companies. The other element that I see that's now also doing quite well is the healthcare side. I saw that quite a lot of healthcare companies trying to digitalize their services. One of it is dialysis. In Malaysia, there's a lot of dialysis centers, and this is one of the services that's not allowed to close. But the problem with dialysis centers, they are still very manual, and the treatment that the patient needs to have is still also very manual. And most of the patients are also not allowed to switch from one center to another. And this is an area and a vertical that is ripe for digitalization. And I saw quite a few proposals already in terms of how this particular vertical is going to be digitalized very, very soon. So I think those are the observations that we have seen as far as Malaysia is concerned, among others.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those insights, and it's good to hear that the lending side will hopefully start to increase, and it's good to hear that it's happening in Malaysia. And so I kind of wanted to, we've got less than 15 minutes left, and there's a few key areas that we did want to cover, and we've got a special kind of question stroke awards that we want to hand out shortly. But before we come on to that, I wanted to just get your quick fire answers around, what advice can you give to fintechs that are seeking to expand in your market today or certainly tomorrow? And there's a lot of founders and businesses on the line, and that seems to be a question that's being asked. And so it'll be good if I could maybe start with you, Maria. What advice can you give to fintechs coming in, and then maybe we'll quickly do a fire round to everyone or the other speakers as well.
Specifically for fintech, I think the most important advice we can give it revolves around regulation and understanding what is the regulatory framework, and engaging. If it's something that's unique, was never done before, then definitely they will be welcomed in the Philippines. But I would definitely advise engaging the regulator in advance, and understanding in this environment if there's anything that could be done differently in light of different restrictions. We've seen recently relaxation of different KYC requirements, just to ensure that we can respond to the consumer demand. But at the same time, there's a lot of players in the Philippines in different sectors, and obviously a lot of them have a very different capitalization and backing and financial backing. Ensuring that I'm sure this is an advice that it will be probably heard by many people, but ensuring that you have enough runway and coming up with your the different plans and business continuity potential profiles, and that's really important because we don't exactly know how the next couple of months are going to plan out. What are the different scenarios that even the government is thinking about relaxing the current lockdown, and how that would affect your operations, including also the protection and the security of your team. So these would be things that you need to plan out in advance before you enter the market or you start your operation.
Sure, and just very quickly, because we're going to be timing out soon. Niki, what's just the one or two things advice that you would give to fintechs that are looking to come into Indonesia?
I think I would like to share a quote of, crises present us with unique conditions that allow innovators to think and move more freely to create rapid, impactful change. And I think the more people, there's a lot of communities getting together in this moment of crisis in a theme of solidarity. And I think the better people come in with that impact at heart first, I think you might be surprised the amount of collaborations and potential abilities to create new partnerships may be on the table that you didn't imagine. And that's where just engaging in the communities, coming with a clear vision of what impact you can bring, might be able to actually foster a lot more innovation and collaboration in the community that you may have never planned. So I think there's a lot of opportunity today to innovate. It is a challenging environment, but I think this is never waste a crisis, right? There's a lot of opportunities as well.
Nice. Who said that quote, Niki?
This was from the Harvard Business Review. I'll give you the author of it.
Nice, thank you. Ridzuan, what would your advice be? I know we talked before about fintechs that are in your network and your association that have operations across different countries and trying to struggle with remote working and different regulations, as Maria pointed out. What advice would you give?
I think what we are doing currently, we are coming out with a playbook that would allow fintech company to have a one-stop center for them to understand at least 5 areas if they want to come to Malaysia, or if they are thinking about coming into a place. I think the 5 elements that you need to look at are talent, the funding, runway, the technology, validation, the narrative that they want to bring, as well as what Maria said just now in terms of the regulation. I think those are the 5 key basic that they need to understand. And coming, if let's say you want to come to Malaysia, definitely come to us, the FinTech Association, because we have the playbook for you to be able to understand those 5 key elements. And for companies that's now in the crisis, maybe this is quite I think but I still want to say it, some companies would have to cease operation during the crisis. And when you need to stop, you need to stop, because I think that's really the reality of a crisis. It presents an opportunity, but it also sends you a signal that this is probably not your time. So that sense, that decisiveness needs to be there for fintech companies. And if you think that this is not the time, please do the right thing and move on, whether the moving on is actually winding up your business included. So that's the advice from me. Thanks.
Sure. And just want to go to an audience question around how can fintech associations collaborate more as one ASEAN? And there was talk around this question goes into an ASEAN fintech framework, and how can we all stand together, because clearly we're feeling isolated on a personal level. Companies are feeling isolated, verticals and sectors are feeling isolated, and nations are as well. And so, how can we all stand together? And it'd be good to get your thoughts on this, Hock. And I know, Ridzuan, you had some ideas when we spoke in the week, and maybe I can then circle back to you on this. But like I'm saying, we've got 5 minutes left, and there's so much more we want to cover. So if you could keep it short and concise, I'd be super grateful.
Yeah, I think because we are not expecting any vaccine to be available in mass quantity for the next 12 to 18 months, a lot of the fintechs will have to adapt very quickly. And then I think at the ASEAN level, I think a very good platform will be the API exchange platform, because this is a non-profit platform available to all fintechs all over the world, not just ASEAN. So we can probably set up a community under the API X platform. And because now I think a lot of the fintech will have to adapt to do sales digitally. And that is a platform whereby they can find potential customers, the potential financial institutions that can do sales with them. Yeah, thanks.
And thanks for that, Hock. And just to quickly follow up, Ridzuan, you know, we had a conversation earlier in the week, and you know, you shared some really good insights around how associations can come together, because there's a lot of similar challenges. There are clearly some similar opportunities, and you know, if you could just enlighten the audience on some of the thoughts you had, and let's try and move on as well.
Yeah, I echo what Hock said just now, because informally, the ASEAN FinTech network is already in existence, but it is just a chat between different FinTech association on an informal basis. But I think what we need to do is to find, as what you mentioned just now, like in terms of common ground to begin with, and also think about building an ecosystem with each other, because now everybody is looking after themselves. The individualistic or nationalistic mindset is really strong now. But I think if we come together on a common ecosystem as a platform, I think every single country has its own strength, and if we can leverage on that strength, I think that would be a very good platform for us to go forward and have a true collaboration, whether it's a crisis or not a crisis situation. And I think that cannot be, denied. And this is probably one of the best time for us to come together and have that formal ecosystem and collaboration at this point of time. I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ridzuan. And I think we're going to pick up on that after this call, because I think it's a great opportunity for the whole region to come together. So I will ask that question, as you've just posed it there, Ridzuan, to each of the panelists after the call, and we'll follow up with the whole group here alongside the unanswered Q&A that we haven't managed to get to. So we will follow up with answers there. To finish off, we just wanted to celebrate the way that the ecosystem is responding and being so resilient at the moment. FinTech associations are known for their award ceremonies and for the awards that they do every year, and obviously at the current situation we can't do that in quite the same way. So we wanted to end with a light-hearted COVID award season. So we did ask each of the speakers to think about 3 categories of awards. We definitely won't touch on all of them now, but we'll follow up after the call. The 3 categories we chose were: who is the most resilient founder that you've come across? What's a good example of a fintech that successfully pivoted their model to respond to the current crisis? And what's an initiative that you've been impressed by, either from the private or public sector, that you think is making a real difference? So I'm just going to do a quick fire round and pick on a couple of you to share one of those examples. So as a recap, it's the most resilient founder, a story of pivoting that's been successful in this period, and then the best response from the public or private sector, the initiative that you've supported. So one of those answers, and I'm just going to choose a quick fire round. Maria, I'd love to hear your choice of one of those categories.
Actually, I will pick one of the traditional banks here. So one of our closest partners, Union Bank, who's pivoting a lot more into fintech. They're becoming their own fintech. So we've seen that they managed to adjust their working model really fast, and being able to even go to areas and services that they would never service before as a traditional bank. So we've been quite excited to be working with them on that front.
Nice. So that's the best initiative from the private sector, I guess. Hock, an answer to one of those questions?
Yeah, I think I have 2 answers. I think the best public agency that responded would be MAS, but I shan't go in details. But the private sector, I would have to say, is AMTD. We have been speaking to the CEO, Kevin Choi, for the last few weeks. I think we have very exciting news to announce in the coming weeks, and it is initiative that will benefit the entire region and not just Singapore. So that would have to go to AMTD for the private sector response.
And we promise you weren't paid to say that, Hock, but appreciate the shout out anyway. Ridzuan, do you have a quick answer to share on one of those awards?
Yeah, I think for private sector, I I really am very disheartened. I mean, I'm very surprised to see Razer turning one of their manufacturing line and producing face masks and able to scale that. And just now I saw they are also able to maintain and produce more than, I think, 5 million masks for the usage during the COVID-19, and even more later if it's needed. And from the public sector in Malaysia, I think one of the best is an agency called Malaysia Digital Economy Corporation. They have been very active in terms of creating awareness about digitalization, or in short, they call themselves MDEC. Very good in terms of coordinating with the industry, as well as connecting us with the policymaker in the government. That really created that needed attention in terms of how digitalization could help going forward, especially post-COVID-19. That's my answer. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks for those awards for Malaysia. Over to Thailand. Top, what would your choice be?
Sure. I have two choices. The first one is 2C2P. The founder is Ong. He is probably the most resilient fintech founder in Thailand. At one point, he had to sell his car to keep the company alive. But he's been running this company for 17 years, 2C2P, and now they're the largest fintech company in Thailand. They raised, last month, they raised $52 million Series E. And most of the credit card or payments, the underlying infrastructure, almost everyone is using 2C2P as coming from the non-bank side. I think this is the best fintech company in Thailand. The founder is Ong. The company is 2C2P. But from the public initiatives, I think the Bank of Thailand is doing really well. Maybe because of the Asian crisis in 1997, the Bank of Thailand became very conservative. And right now, the debt to GDP ratio for Thailand is not as bad. We are doing really well, actually. We are quite wealthy compared to America or European companies. The debt to GDP ratio in Thailand is really low. So the Thai government is able to to get more loans from the IMF in a healthy way, and to provide this soft loan quickly to help SMEs and startups to extend their runway. So I think the public initiative would go to the Bank of Thailand.
Nice. And to finish us off, Niki, we haven't heard any, I don't think, about a fintech that's pivoted their business model. Can you share an example maybe of a business model that you've seen that's been adapted well to the current situation, to COVID?
Well, I think there's been a number, but the ones that deserve probably a better highlight, and it's not just fintech, it's people that are even in e-commerce that are pivoting their businesses to create masks, like the Razer example. But in Indonesia, there's quite a number of e-commerce retailers and people that are in adjacent lines of business have taken upon themselves to help try and create protective equipment. And give them away, and launch equity crowdfunded or crowdfunded programs to just be able to push it out to the vulnerable parts of our population. So it's been, I think those deserve a bit more of a shout out for their hard work.
Definitely. And a virtual round of applause, I think, both for those initiatives and also to our speakers. And hopefully this is just the beginning. As Ridzuan said, there's so much more we can do as a region, as a community together. So thank you for joining, and thank you to our audience for participating. You should soon be seeing on your screen just a flash up of a QR code to take us to our next Green Shoot session, which will be focused on RegTech, which was one of those verticals that was touched on earlier. So thank you again for everyone for joining. Happy long weekend, and thanks to our speakers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.